Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this civil society plenary at the RC21 Urban Sociology Conference, taking place virtually, but from Antwerp. My name is Stijn Oosterweel. I'm a professor in urban sociology at the University of Antwerp and the main organizer of this conference. And together with my colleague who's sitting on my left side, Thomas van Oeterve, who's a professor in urban planning at the University of Antwerp, we will introduce and moderate this civil society plenary. The title of the Civil Society Plenary, as you can see on the screen, is Contesting Urban Infrastructure Projects, and we will try to compare experiences from the Antwerp Oosterweel link project with experiences from the Durban port expansion project. So two very different cases. Now, the basic idea behind this comparison came from the PhD work from Elisabeth van Wiemeers, who's a postdoctoral researcher in urban planning, and her PhD was actually based on these two case studies, also other case studies, but these two as well. And so the basic idea from this session came from her work, but she's one of the main organizers also behind the screen. So she preferred not to be moderate and introduce this session, but it's very much her ideas and her work that are the basis of this plenary. So we brought two people to the studio today. On the one hand, Manu, which I will introduce in a minute. On the other hand, joining us through the live stream or to the video link is Desmond from Durban. But before we give the word to these two speakers, let me quickly introduce the reasons behind this plenary. And so maybe I should turn on the slides now. So I'm not sure I can move. Okay. So what is the rationale behind this session? Why do we have a civil society plenary at this RC21 conference? Well, of course, this conference is not about Antwerp. It is organized from Antwerp, but it's not really about Antwerp. But when reflecting with the organizing committee and with the scientific committee, if we reflected on if we could bring one topic from Antwerp to the conference, one issue that has been very, very important for the contemporary dynamics, for the recent dynamics of Antwerp, what would it be? It's quite easy to pick up on, quite easy to select the contestation of urban infrastructure projects as one of the main issues that has been shaping and informing the urban developments of Antwerp over the past 10 to 15 years, and especially the contestation of that. And so in Antwerp we've been, and that's the case of the stRaten-generaal of Manu, which will be introduced in a minute. That's really been a very interesting case of how urban infrastructure projects are contested by civil society organization in all kind of new and innovative ways and have led to new forms of conflict mediation. And so that's the reason why we chose to have this session, this topic as the subject of a session. But of course, we don't want to remain here in Antwerp, and we chose to compare it to the case of Durban in South Africa.
Okay, thank you, Stijn. It's, well, an obvious thing to say that civil society and its politics varies across time and space. What we will discuss here is how these differ. And we have two cases in... not yet. In Antwerp and Durban. But first there is the question, why infrastructure? First, why is infrastructure contested? It's highly visible, it are large projects and also costly projects. That's these are one of the reasons why there is some contestations around the world. There are other reasons, since, infrastructures cause often environmental degradation. Think of air pollution, noise, habitat fragmentation. So these are also major issues together with livability in neighboring residential areas. But there's also the critique of infrastructure that it are the ways through which resources are exported. So it's also part of an exploitation regime in some cases, and that's also a reason why infrastructure is contested. But there are also gender issues, since who is overrepresented on infrastructures? Often male middle class, white commuters, for instance. That's also discussed more in the feminist literature, which also emphasizes that the ideals and ideas of policymakers often reflect the needs and wants of the male commuters of the middle class. There's also a major critique that they are often top-down projects without a lot of participation. So this will also be discussed today. And increasingly, the last decades, that infrastructure development, that infrastructure has become a financial product. And so the rationale is not to build something which is, well, useful or wanted by a community, but more to please the financial markets. So this will be discussed. This was some context for two cases, Durban and Antwerp, two port cities, with a different context. The first one is Durban, so a port city. You see there on the slides. You see the port more to the north. In the south, there are plans for a dig-out port, so a new port expansion on a site where there is now an airport strip, but also petrochemical plants are there located with major health effects on the neighborhoods in the vicinity. And in the middle, there is also Clairwood is indicated on the map, and that's because there are plans to rezone the area so that residents will be replaced by industry and logistics facilities. That's for the case of Durban, which will be discussed and introduced later. And then there is Antwerp, that's where we are here. And already for, well, it's more than 20 years that the plans are again on the table to close the ring road in order to make it more like a circle. It's contested, a new motorway link close to the city center. With, well, lots of opposition, different citizen movements are involved. However, why is this case so interesting is that from the early start, pretty early in the process, the citizen movements came up with alternatives. And it was not just contestation and protest, it was there, but there was a strong emphasis on co-creation, on working together, the government, citizen movements, other actors, to develop better plans, new plans, not just to oppose a project, but to improve it. So that's why we selected two speakers. And why did we select these two speakers? Because it are not just activists, but also people who reflect on what they do and what activism is and what their role is in society and for the communities they work with. So therefore we prepared some questions.
Okay, so before we switch to the speakers of tonight, we'll just sort of briefly go over the questions that we asked them to talk about and that we would like to have the discussion about. And the first question is really a pretty straightforward question: is if you want to create changes in the way these urban infrastructure projects develop and the way they are developed, is how do you do so? Do you do it by entering the governance structures, the urban governance structure, the multi-scalar governance structures, or do you try to change things from outside? Do you seek cooperation and change the system from, change the infrastructure projects by going inside of the governing structures, or do you stay outside? And what does that mean for how you build your organization, for how your organization is conceived, and how much change is there really, how much scope for change is there really in the respective governing structures in Antwerp vis-a-vis Durban? Now, a second question is, again, pretty straightforward. How do you build legitimacy? Do you build legitimacy by keeping yourself very accountable to the grassroots, to the people that are behind your organization, the ordinary citizens, supporting organization? Do you seek legitimacy by building superior expertise, superior knowledge about a certain things, specific alternatives which are better than the ones on the table? And who do you seek legitimacy from? From the many stakeholders which are often involved in these urban infrastructure projects, who do you seek legitimacy from? Do you seek them from all the stakeholders together, or are some stakeholders more important than others in seeking legitimacy? And then thirdly, of course, this is very often about participation, mostly about participation. What is participation for? Is participation there to create a broad and popular support for particular projects? Or is participation about empowering citizens to make their own choices? Or maybe both of them together, maybe they are not running against each other. And do you need, if you contest a certain project, do you need expertise? Do you need alternatives to be able to be legitimate in your contestation? That's what participation is about. Or can you just say, no, that's not what we want, without sort of voicing alternatives? So these are the three questions that we would like to talk about in this plenary session. And so let me just quickly introduce the first speaker, and then we can listen to their experiences. So I'm very happy now to introduce Desmond Sa. And I'm really, really happy that he could be here with us tonight, because, as you may have heard on the news, the socio-political situation in KwaZulu-Natal, where Desmond and his organization are based, is at this moment very tense. Riots broke out a couple of days ago after the confinement of the former president, Jacob Zuma. And we all want you to know, Desmond, in Durban, that our thoughts are very much with you and with the communities you work for, because we know this is not an easy situation for you, and not a very good time to be talking to us over in the conference. Now, Desmond Sa is a South African environmentalist, a high-profile South African environmentalist who received in 2014 the Goldman Prize. And he's known for protesting environmental justice issues for many decades now, especially in Durban, in South Africa, and is mainly working around access to green space and fighting against polluting industrial sites. The region which he's working from is also sadly known as a cancer alley, because of the more than 300 industrial facilities that are in the city. And to address the environmental justice problems that emerge from that situation, he founded the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance. And that network has been very, very successful, at least has been successful in opposing other polluting sites, and has advocated to prevent the further expansion of the port in the communities, the surrounding communities around the port of Durban. That comes at the price, and in 2011 his house was firebombed for his advocacy. So he has, paid a price for his resistance to this expansion of the port and these industrial facilities. He was raised in the apartheid era in South Africa, and that inspired him to integrate environmental and social justice issues in his activism. And for his work around environmental justice, he received an honorary doctorate from the Durban University of Technology. Desmond, we're very, very happy to have you with us here. And we're now over to you, and you can tell us all you want to say about your work, your very important work in Durban.
Well, good evening to everyone, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the people of KwaZulu-Natal and Durban in particular. I would say it's the right time. I've come at the right time to speak about something that is the infrastructure, over 20 billion rand worth of infrastructure has collapsed completely. So this is the right time to speak about it, and how do we find alternatives? How do we find a people-centered vision of this infrastructure that we talk about? So Durban, as you rightfully said, is a apartheid era forced removal system where people of color were moved aside and placed as buffer zones between the highly industrial area and highly polluting areas. With these comes high levels of pollution. We have already documented widely the levels of benzene, toluene, xylene, sulfur, CO2, you name all the chemicals that form the inventory all over the world, and including in Europe. These chemicals cause harm, and 2 health studies have proved that. Now I'm going to get to that later. So living in these facilities and alongside dirty industries has created a lot of problems for the local population in Durban. Among some of the projects that they've been talking about was the expansion, the dig-out port, the ring load and backup port development has become the new issue faced by residents, but many more. The increase of the chemical and petrochemical industry. Durban is home to the biggest chemical industry in Africa, also the biggest container port in Africa. So you can imagine having the biggest container port where there's thousands of trucks. And what we just saw last week in South Africa and in the province and in Durban, over 50 trucks were burnt. So it tells you the issues that people are confronted with and what people have turned to. So it means that there has to be something different. Something has to give. Government's plan is to develop big infrastructure projects, from port expansion to road expansion, to rail expansion, to expansion of the petrochemical, the mining industries, big logistics. That's the program. So there's a lot of logistic parks that have been developed. And this week in KZN, in the province I am in, a lot of them went up in flames. It's just a pity that they had to go up in flames and people took it in their own hands. And that wasn't because of the fights that we are having. Rather, it's because of the former president, Jacob Zuma, as you rightly said, was participating in that. But environmental justice is all about people. How do we build a collectiveness with people so we can face all the challenges that we are facing, where people are not being part of the solution, completely ignored. This is a picture of the old Durban Harbour when we first started, where it was people-centered. Everything was about people. How that has changed rapidly over the years. So there's been, since 2012, government came out with a plan to, in between the old Durban airport as well as the harbour, there's hundreds of communities. There's over 250,000 people. And what government's plan was to develop a big port to support the infrastructure development of the biggest motor corporation, Toyota, together with the current port. And then the people in the middle would have been all moved out. And so that led to massive expansion. People were angry. However, through that mobilization of people, because the development wasn't people-centered. The development wasn't from the bottom up. The development was from the top up, where government sat in some corner with the big corporations and decided a plan. And that plan was to remove people from the current situation where they live. Where they were going to place us, no one knew. You must bear in mind that, as I said in the beginning, many of us that live in the local communities near the port or around the industry are people that have suffered from forced removals in the past during the apartheid era. And this would have been, some of us would have been second time, some of us would have been the third time that we've been moved. So you can imagine the uproar that forced the government. And it took on a huge campaign. One was that there were regular meetings, massive mobilization, protest, but also we took on the international banks. Let me just say that some of the banks that we visited were the World Bank, the African Bank, some of the local banks that were going to support the infrastructure and invest in it, but also the Japanese government, which owned Toyota, was going to invest huge amount of money to develop the dig-out port. So when I was on my route, after I got the 2014 Goldman Award in California, I went over to Washington and we had a ceremony there, and I went over to the White House, met with Obama, met with others within the administration, and said, well, you have a role to play here, because the Japanese ambassador wouldn't meet with me in Washington. And after speaking to the Obama administration, we got a meeting the very same day with the Japanese ambassador to Washington, and we met him at 8 o'clock the next morning. And then then that was the beginning of the divestment of the port. But massive effort from the communities of South Durban, challenging government as well, and putting on the table an alternative. So we were using the science, we were using architecture, we were using the people's knowledge, that people had a lot of knowledge in them, where you can develop a plan, not only relying on engineers and other people, but also ordinary people who had a vision of what they were seeking, what sort of communities they wanted to have. And the port wasn't in it. Clearly the community said, we don't want the port. So that was a good initiative from the communities of South Durban. And going to Washington, managed to get the Japanese ambassador to meet with me, and then they pulled out the investment in investing for a dig-out port that would have moved thousands of people and lose their homes. The plan that you see there is the biggest. It's the biggest chemical and petrochemical industry. It supplies 10% of South Africa's growth. And you can see the paper mills. We've got 2 paper mills on the south of Durban, but 2 paper mills in the north of Durban. Then you got the petrochemical refinery. And just to say, while I'm talking about the petrochemical refinery, so the Shell and BP refinery announced yesterday that the refinery has been closed because of the unrest. The Petronas engine refinery that used to be owned by Modal and is owned by Petronas, the Malaysian government, that refinery blew up on the 4th of December, blew up on the 4th of December and hasn't restarted at all. The entire unit blew up. It impacted on ranges of over 5 kilometers. Lots of people were affected. Lots of people, children were injured. And we're still talking to them about compensation, but the refinery won't start up because they're talking about converting the petrochemical refinery into a storage depot and import the goods from either Malaysia or the Middle East. We are not keen on that. There's quite a number of companies during COVID that closed down. Most of them are chemical companies, but they only closed temporarily. I think once COVID starts up, they will get going again. So it's massive. They are expanding the container port, and that they want to bring in over 20 million containers to Durban. And that would support the SADC countries of Zimbabwe and other countries. So that's the problem with what's going on. Expansion of the chemical industry, expansion of the port, expansion of the container port. Sorry. So South Durban's got the previous map that talks about it. And what I want to talk about here is that that's all the residents in between the blue. You can see the bit of the red is the chemical industry. You can see the refineries. It's massive. A lot of people live there. 1992, we done a health study there at the Settler School Primary School. And we found that 52% of the local community had asthma, chronic asthma, but also quite a number of them had leukemia as well as cancer, which is very ripe. That's why we call it Cancer Alley. We done a door-to-door study first, and then we done the health study. And then government didn't believe the figures and the industry. So they paid for a further health study that compared the citizens of South Durban with the citizens of North Durban. And they found that there was an increase in chronic asthma, that the cancer rate had escalated through the heavy metals that were being disposed onto the society. There hasn't been a cancer study done per se, but there's been community surveillance and been door-to-door that has been verified by the health medical hospitals in Durban. So there are 2 health studies. One is the 1992 health study, and the other one was completed in 2007. It's been peer-reviewed and reviewed all over the world. So it's been passed, and it shows the high levels of the health. And that study, you can get it off our website. You can take any information off the website, and I'll give it to you before I close here tonight, so you can get all that information. There's hundreds of schools in between all this here, and a lot of the children, as I said, they've been tests done, and a lot of them have got asthma, and over 50% of them have got chronic asthma. So that's part of the problem. And also what we call childhood leukemia. leukemia of the blood. That's a cancer of the blood in the kids in schools. That's a big problem. Government hasn't. We are challenging government to do a just transition, and we'll talk a bit about that because the just transition is important. So we move away from the fossil fuel industry. It's a huge fight as well. That's some of the protests. It's more, and that's what it does. It talks to our right to an environment. South Africa has got the most progressive constitution. And in the constitution, the Bill of Rights, section 24, talks about your right to a clean environment. But the number of incidents and explosions and fires and gassing out that takes place violates those rights on a daily basis. And as much as we got the progressive constitution and all the clauses in the constitution where you're supposed to hold the big corporations accountable, there's a lack of political will from the politicians and from the government. So you don't get anything done because they don't see it as important. They see that we are the sacrificial zone where people's lives can be sacrificed, and if they die, so be it. And many of our families and children have died of cancer, and we've had to bury them over the years. And both studies have proven that. So the other thing is about disruption to livelihoods, communities, and environments, high order. The former president that's now lying in jail, in prison, Jacob Zuma, introduced Operation Phakisa. Operation Phakisa means hurry up in English. It's a Zulu word, but it means in English, hurry up. And what has happened is that they talk about the ocean economy, but the ocean economy is basically, it's all about oil and gas. It's about taking the ocean away from the people, similar to the land grab that has happened in South Africa and Africa as a whole. And we've seen that traditional fishing areas have been taken away from fishermen. And we've currently got 2 cases in the High Court in Johannesburg, in Pretoria, around the oil and gas company, Sasol, as well as the Italian Oil Corporation, because they want to explore for oil and gas off the ocean and destroy our beautiful beaches in South Africa, but also destroy our marine resources that we have and beautiful marine protective areas. So we got those 2 cases. We're fighting Sasol and Eni. We managed to get ExxonMobil out of South Africa. They pulled out. But we have got now the Eskom company as well as the other oil companies that are coming to South Africa, not only to frack, but also to explore the entire ocean. So Jacob Zuma, as the ex-president, sold off blocks in the ocean, right down from the Mozambican border. And you know what's going on in Mozambique with oil and gas, the same problem, but from the Mozambican border right down to the Western Cape to the Northern Cape. All being sold off for oil and gas. We are challenging that and taking it to court, but we're also protesting. We're writing about alternative. We're putting our pressure on government. So we are organized with the fisher folks all along the coastline. We are also working with guys with fisher folks in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Togo, in Sudan, in Kenya, as well as Mozambique, in bringing an African solution to the disruption of livelihoods, especially with communities and marine resources being destroyed. And we're pushing back on the big cases with the oil and gas. We have written a number of books about the livelihoods and fishing folks. That's also on our website as well. You can get all of that. But there's a huge fight, and we are in the action. And as you can see there with the photos, thousands of people. On the KZN coast where I live, the entire coastline, there's over 50,000 fishermen. And if you talk about Cape Town and the Western Cape and Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape, you're talking about over 100,000 fishermen that fish for livelihood. Given South Africa's popular unemployment rate of 37%, and that's over 50% of our young people, we have no alternative but to fish for a living and put food on our table. And the big oil corporations are rushing here chemical industry, the wrong attitude of our government thinks that we should give them the ocean, let them drill for oil, and yet it's not going to be employment for our people. You know, with drilling comes only about 5 or 10 jobs at the maximum. So it's not the solution to develop anything and say we must build more infrastructure like the oil refineries, chemical industries, because you can create jobs. They won't create jobs. They've not created jobs. They are minimum jobs, and that is well written off, and that information is available to go. Hence, we have the restlessness that we've seen last week, all the looting and all that, because the young people are restless. They're all unemployed. Thousands of them are unemployed. So if you're unemployed and you're hungry, what do? Government's bringing the wrong plan through. And we need an alternative that creates jobs for people and provides food on the table for people. And the oil and petrochemical industry, or even the expansion of the Durban harbour, is not going to do that. The next one is the South Durban, and it's the expansion of the chemical industry. That's the dig-out port. Where you see it there, that would have created huge havoc. And that's been pushed back. They're talking about it 2032, but we are on our guard. We are proactive about it. We are talking to society. We're saying we have to change the trajectory around building big infrastructure, because it doesn't create jobs. It doesn't reduce the unemployment. It doesn't reduce the hunger and poverty in the country. And we need to create real jobs that's going to be people driven. So the big ports, as you can see, Durban's big port, it's all about the containers, it's all about the chemical and storage facilities. And bringing in those big Panamax shipping. Those Panamax shipping only create 17 jobs, and they bring in thousands of containers on it, creating 17 jobs. So do we need big ships? Do we need a big shipping, big harbor? We certainly don't need it. Thank you. So you see, that's how they were going to do it. The one on the left is within the present harbor, and the one on the right is the expansion right on top, and the one on the bottom is the return to the bay. So there's 3 expansions of the port that we've stopped for now. But as I said, it might come back in 2032. It hasn't created any jobs. The expansion that's been done within the harbor at the present moment hasn't created jobs. And we've seen the result of it, that people are angry and have done what they wanted to do to stop it. Again, that's the Bay Head Basin, and you can see all the photos of what the intentions are. That's a current port. We've got the sandbank all there, where the marine life grows and gets but also where the birds come from all over the country, and they thrive off the sandbanks, and that's been destroyed. That's a major one. These big infrastructure means that our government is a climate denialist. Despite the Paris Accord, they've walked left. They walked left and spoke left and walked right. So they signed the agreement in Paris, and what they've come back and done is expand mining, expand the port, expand the oil and fossil fuel industry. And so how do we deal with climate change? And the former municipal manager in Durban, Mike Sutcliffe, was the chief protagonist in regard to denying that. So climate change is still a massive issue. We see weather patterns changing. We see a lot of flooding. We see droughts in the country all over the show. And yet government continues down that trajectory. This is what it is. And you've seen it now, how many of it, and the different storms. And in 2018, the current president flew back from, he was at the World Trade Organization, where he was cutting all the deals to increase the fossil fuel industry. And then the province that I'm in, over hundreds of people died. Houses were destroyed. Heavy floods. He had to fly back and come into Durban and apologize and say, you know what, he empathizes with the people. But nothing was done. Up until now, people are still living in abject poverty and in bad, inhumane condition. So what are we recommending? 5 steps of South. Reverse attempted rezoning of the Claeys area, where they want to take residential area and put it into logistics and port expansion. Mobilize, enforce and expand existing residential zoning, because we think that if you create small industries and small shopping centers and communities, then you're creating a holistic approach to how people can survive. Mobilize solidarity in Durban and everywhere, which we are doing. We are all over working on the continent through climate change, through also Oil Watch Africa, and through groups all over in the world to bring about change, because we know we are stronger together. We have to take seriously the climate rhetoric. Lower the trade vulnerability, stop importing goods, ship freight to trade. We need a dry port. We need to plan, instead of having these millions of trucks on our road, we need a dry port that can take care of that. We need to plan and implement post-pollution, post-Durban with million climate jobs. The million climate jobs is happening in other parts of Africa, in other parts of Europe. Why can't we have the same? We deserve to have the same. We are same. We believe that the people are all over the world are the same type of people, and we're all yearning for the same thing. Thank you.
For your presentation. It was really interesting to see what's happening over there and the activities you did together with the communities. And before we will raise questions to both speakers, we will first go to the second speaker, which is Manu Claeys, who is also here with us in Antwerp. Who is Manu? Well, he has a background in literature and philology, so he's not an urban planner or an infrastructure or transport expert by training. However, over the years, he has become a kind of urban planner without having the degree. So since, say, 2005, he was heavily involved in not just protest and contestation. There was legal action, there were protests in the streets, but also with developing alternatives. Not just about mobility, not just about urban development, but also alternatives about democracy or politics. How to work together, how to co-create the city of the future. He has also reflected on that. He has, for instance, written a book. I guess it's his latest book on since he has published a lot already in the past, essays, non-fiction, but was about democracy. Let's Save Democracy was a title. So outlining how a different way of working, of reworking democracy can look like based on the real-life experience here in Antwerp. A key moment, a key episode in the discussion about the ring road in Antwerp came in 2017, when there was an agreement between the government and citizen movements, the Covenant of the Future, it is called. And there, the motorway is one of the 5 main points of agreement. So yes, there can be a new motorway link, however, with some constraints, and there are many other measures which are also included in the agreement. What's also worth mentioning, and perhaps quite remarkable, is that Manu has become a board member of the public company that will actually, or is building the motorway link. And well, that has also raised some discussion. So while in the media, Manu will always defend the agreement, all elements of the agreement, so those who invest in livability, in alternative modes of transport, but also the motorway connection itself. And according to some of his former allies or other activists, yeah, that's a bit too much sleeping with the enemy. So that's why this is an interesting case, that an activist who invests in co-creation, reflects on it, also feels the tension between one, well, some other activists or former activists, as well as the government. So this is an interesting point to reflect on what it means to co-create, to be an activist, or to combine these different roles. Well, and now I will give the floor to Manu, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. I'll take you through a story that has been developing for over 16 years now, and I'll take you through some kind of a documentary, almost a movie. So I'll show you a lot of visual material, but that's to give you an idea of what happened in the past and also what led to the change in 2017 that was mentioned. So both parts. The story begins last century. In 1999, there was the Battle of Seattle, and that was the time when people came out in the street and asked for co-creation. They said, okay, these big powwows by the International Monetary Fund and the WHO and the G7 and all kinds of important people, Davos, you know, people that came together, and they regulated and managed and decided. People were fed up with it, and there was some protest in the street, even some violence, and people basically asked, we demand public voice. In that same year, in Antwerp, a citizen movement was established. It was called stRaten-generaal. stRaten-generaal is a wordplay on the Estates General. The Estates General is a group that was established in the 16th century. It was some kind of an advisory board for the prince or for the king. So it was the very first beginning of participation, let's say, on a very low level. But this stRaten-generaal is a wordplay. It's the same, but coming from the streets. The founders of that citizen movement, I was not involved in. The founders developed some kind of a worksheet with 4 important keywords. And you see them. In Dutch, it's weerwerk, denkwerk, netwerk, veldwerk. And in English, it's resistance, study, network, fieldwork. And that's what we applied to our conflict that arose. In 2005, the Flemish government made known a plan for Antwerp. They were going to build an Oosterweel connection, which was completing the ring road around Antwerp, the ring road that is not a complete ring by now, but the idea was to complete it. And as you see on the picture, it was not just completing a ring road, it was really rewriting the whole program of Antwerp. It was involving cutting a lot of green, it was involving adding motor lanes on a large scale. So we saw that it was not just about completing the ring road, but about actually destroying the city. That's what we said. So what we said is, okay, we're gonna put forward a complaint. And that was the resistance. So we put forward a complaint against that plan that involved 18 lanes in the middle of Antwerp. That's nowhere in Belgium we have 18 lanes of highway. That's something that you see in Los Angeles, but not in Belgium. And we filed complaint, and that was December 2005. The complaint was 44 pages with lots of alternatives and a lot of critique. And then in March 2008, a second movement joined the battle, let's say. This movement was called Ademloos, which means breathless. And they added the element of healthy air, so air quality, because that was very close to the people. What we had done in the 3 previous years was some kind of a almost theoretical debate about infrastructure, urban planning, with lots of applause by the field, but not really reaching the general populace. This second group said, okay, we have to reach more people and we have to put it on some kind of an existential plane. We have to add this air quality. And then in 2009, we went together, the 2 groups went to a referendum. In Belgium, you can ask for a referendum if you have enough signatures and a petition. And in Antwerp, we needed like 70,000 signatures to have a proper referendum. We had a referendum and we won the referendum. And you see there one of the propaganda almost pictures that we put forward was, we don't want a new highway through the city that is as wide as our cathedral is tall, which is 123 meters. And then apart from the resistance, there was also the study. So we always put forward alternatives. We involved the field of urban planners, of specialists, of experts. We went abroad. We went to see examples of good practice in other cities. This is a picture of our visit to Madrid, where they had plans to put a cap on the ring road. Apart from resistance and study, there's also networking. So what we said is, okay, there's these two big groups in Antwerp, but of course many other groups deal with similar problems or similar challenges. So why not join forces? And around these two major groups, the two major groups, a lot of Antwerp groups joined forces. So that's the network, cooperation between citizen movements. Although they're not all fighting pro different infrastructure, at least they're working on ecology, trees, bicycle lanes, theater for the poor, whatever comes together. And then the last thing is the fieldwork. Fieldwork means you just mobilize, you get into the street, you organize marches in the street, you organize information sessions in the evening, and I can tell you lots of people were interested in those information sessions. Even to the extent that on your left you see an information session by the government, and on your right you see an information session the same week by the citizen movements. And that's a very telling picture, of course, also for the people in power. And then in 2014, a third player joined forces. Apart from stRaten-generaal and Ademloos, there was the group called Ringland. And they went for a complete cap on the whole ring road around Antwerp. So we were fighting against, let's say, the additional ring road. They said, okay, there's also an existing ring road, and also that one has to be improved. This fight to cap the ring road was already, let's say, steaming in the city. It was people were talking about it for over 10 years. In 2004, a smaller group has established, has put forward the plan, the idea to put a cap on the ring road. They organized information sessions. They organized Ringpark feasts. This is an impression of this feast with people from the neighborhoods involved. They came to cook things and sell them, or they came to organize playgrounds. And more propositions about this putting a cap on the Antwerp ring road were put forward in the ensuing years, in the following years. So in 2014, this dream of putting a cap on the ring road was revisited, basically. And this is the dream by Ringland put forward, and a lot of people from Antwerp were very much pro this dream, of course. So in 2014, in May, there was election, local election, also national election. So the whole month of May in 2014, we organized things to make known to the Antwerp people this dream. For example, this is one thing that we organized, putting a flag every day next to the ring road, and one organization or movement from Antwerp was invited to come and put the flag. The first day we had to look for an organization. The last day there was a long list of organizations in Antwerp that still wanted to put that flag. We organized a march in Antwerp. We called it Stappen om te overkappen, which means marching for the cap. May 2014. 10,000 people showed up, which is quite a lot of people in a city the size of Antwerp, which is like between 500,000 and 1 million, considering how you look at it. And this impressed the people in power very much. The next day there was a presentation of these plans of Ringland for 1,300 people, and there was fully booked, so they had to organize 2 evenings. We also still did small things, like, for example, we organized a photo competition for one of the zones, the green zones that was going to disappear, and we invited people in Antwerp to send 3 pictures of that very beloved green spot, and we said we're gonna put your pictures, the best pictures, in a photo book. And the nice thing about it was that we reached 2 publics. We reached the young and hip that went to illegally swim there, and we also reached the older people in Antwerp who learned to swim there in the 1930s all the way to the 1960s. And the local newspaper made a special 8-page display on this thing just because they liked it. In September 2015, we had a second Ringpark party, still a lot of fun. But we also added legal procedures, as we were fighting for 10 years then, and we had gained a lot of support in the city, but the government still wasn't in. So we also went to the Council of State, as it is called. We filed complaint, and we also started to gather signatures for a second referendum. So that increased the pressure. And then at the end of 2015, there was a breakthrough. The Flemish government said, okay, we've had it, 10 years of discussion and fight and conflict. We're going to appoint a superintendent, and we want to say to the people, we want to cooperate, to really start all over again, basically. So we moved that new process, the three citizen movements, we joined that new process. And then in 2017, this big change came. There was a covenant for the future, toekomstverband in Dutch, which was signed between the Flemish government, the three citizen movements, and the City Council of Antwerp. And in that thing, in this covenant, we decided to have a smaller local ring road. We decided to have a port trajectory. I can say to Desmond that we also have a big port in Antwerp. It's the second port in Europe. So we wanted to have a port trajectory for the transit traffic that doesn't have to go through the city. We also wanted to reduce the car traffic in the larger area of Antwerp from 70% to 50% by 2030. And we also, of course, wanted this cap on the ring. So all of this was in this covenant for the future. There were two shifts involved in the Covenant for the Future, I think. We made a change possible from highway infrastructure project thinking to sustainable city planning, but we also made this change from activism to participation, which is very important. They're parallel. The following years, more breakthroughs came. The Flemish government allocated 1.25 billion euros for the first CAP projects. And we also started to get some attention abroad. In 2019, in Prague, the Eurocities Cooperation Award was awarded to Antwerp. And the new City Council government in 2018 built its new policy agreement around this Covenant for the Future, which was also a big signal. We organized ring days where people were invited to come and see the plans that were established. And gradually, the most ambitious citizen participation experiment in Belgium started. And of course, for this citizen participation experiment, we had to establish some kind of a new architecture, a new process architecture. So lots of schemes and organograms were made. It's really an experiment, still ongoing today. For example, here you see the red squares, they are the co-creative zones, and the blue squares are the political zones. And we try to find connections between the two of them. In the Covenant for the Future, we established what we call workbenches. In the workbenches, the main input from citizens and experts is gathered. And in those workbenches, there's 5 main stakeholders, and actually there's 3 more important stakeholders. They're the administration. The administration always has to do the thing. The experts, they are involved. They're external experts and internal experts. The citizen movements can put forward experts as well. And there's the citizens. That's what we call the golden triangle. They're always there. In every workbench, these 3 groups are involved. This Covenant for the Future is a long-term commitment, at least until 2030. There's relevant budgets for the participation and the co-creation. We always say if we're going to build $1 billion infrastructure, at least make sure that there's a couple of millions just for the participation. And it's also a very deep process. It's very innovative. As said, I have written a couple of books and essays on democracy processes. And in 2018, I wrote a book, Save Democracy. And I put forward some kind of a model. It's an Octopus model. I had written a review I had read a review in The Guardian the very same evening that we signed the Covenant for the Future. It's a review on a book written by an Australian philosopher on the octopus. And what I saw is, of course, everybody knows an octopus has 8 arms. But the interesting thing is that the intelligence of the octopus, 1/3 is in the head and 2/3 are in the arms. So it's way different from the human body. All our intelligence is in our head, and then the arms will kind of move, the rest will move. The idea is in the octopus that it's going back and forward, the intelligence, all the time. And of course, that's what's necessary in co-creation. So with this octopus model in mind, I found a way to show that you can go from activism to participation, and also what is necessary in activism and what is necessary in participation. So in activism, the main things are always you're pioneering, you're dissident, you're reacting against stuff, and you're also communicating. You're some kind of a journalist. And all these aspects, when in very successful citizen movements, pioneering, being a dissident, and being a journalist, it's always the same. It always happens, whether it's in the 1960s or in climate and Youth for Climate lately. The challenge is to inject all the energy of activism into procedures that are offered by governments, co-creative and participatory procedures. And that's what we're working on in Antwerp. In Antwerp, we don't work on deliberation, like, for example, what they did in Dublin on the abortion issue with citizen panels. We work with stakeholders, as I said. So the citizens, the experts, and the civil servants, they're the stakeholders, and they do the job. And you can do that in different ways. I'll skip this slide because it has too much information, let's say. But the same thing comes in this slide. In the workbenches, we have what we call in-between spaces where the systemic world and the living world come together. Let's say the very theoretical world and the practical work. It's coming from top down, but it's also bottom up. So co-creation and participation, it's not only bottom up, it's also top down. It involves the citizens, the civil servants, and the experts. We work in different fields, so it's not only about infrastructure, it's also about environment, it's about climate, there's social issues, it's long term. We try to think out of the box, so we don't want to be afraid of new ideas. And we also agreed upon the safe space. That means if you work together in a co-creation, you have to do that in a safe space where people are polite, where people respect each other, where people are able to finish a sentence, and where you can combine different levels of expertise, study, background, and whatever. And we have workbenches, but we have workbenches in different ways. So we have what we call scrum sessions, we have work ateliers, we have mini focus groups with a couple of people, we have open moments with hundreds and thousands of people, we have what we call sounding board groups, and go on and go on. If you apply that to the Ringparks, we have 8 Ringparks and 8 workbenches in progress. And the teams that the experts that have to design these Ringparks, of course, they also have to respect the process architecture. So in their process, they don't only design, but they also have to make sure that all these scrum sessions, sounding board, that they have a place in this process. So we have open moments, we have workshops, we have interview settings, we have debates, we have plenary sessions. This is an impression from Ringpark West. Different ways of coming together with people. This is a mini focus group in COVID times. It's the smallest of the smallest bubble possible, but we have organized lots of them just to go to the field and to ask people from the neighborhood to have their input as well. And then this input comes. So out of the mini focus groups, you get a list of what people really want in the neighborhood, what their needs are, what their concerns are, and stuff like that. We also go to the schools, so we try to reach out as much as possible to reach as many people as possible. And if they don't come to the workbenches, the design teams and the people from the administration go to places. It's also important to communicate about what's going on in different ways, many levels. many methods. We also organize workshops on very specific issues, for example, on social safety. So if you design something, if you have spatial planning, it's not only about how nice it's going to look or what's in it for different people, but you also want to make sure that it's safe. And that's one of the big concerns for people, whether it's traffic safety or non-violent environments or whatever. This is an example of what the difference is between, on the left, the existing ring road, not capped yet, and on the right, what it's going to be. And we have worked on this for a little bit more than 2 years with a lot of people, with all these different things, scrum sessions, sounding boards. And in Antwerp, the city council, the experts and the citizens are highly enthusiastic about the major change. And nobody saw this change coming. That's the weird thing. If you ask experts to design innovative infrastructure, they will never come up or end up with a thing like this. You need the injection of the citizens and of different people. We go through we go through a lot of variants in this process, of course. It takes time, it's a slow thing, and it's also working very much in detail. And I can tell you that many citizens and many ordinary people and ordinary groups and organizations are able to work on a huge level of detail. There's a lot of patience. As long as you're involved, people follow. So that's another level. Are we going to take a turn to the left? Are we going to take a turn to the right? Do we need a tramway? Do we need, how many car lanes do we need? In COVID times, of course, we also had to go digital. So we organized webinars and Zooms. We also, that's also very important, the administration, the citizen movements and the experts, they have a monthly gathering about communication. How are we going to communicate to the outside world and to the inside world? So we try to agree on that so that it's not communicating in confusing ways. And one of the last things that I want to share with you is that people from abroad are looking at Antwerp more and more. And for example, we went to explain the whole Antwerp case in Amsterdam. And in Amsterdam, they have decided last year to also install the system of workbenches. They call it make benches, but it's the same system, and it's modeled on the Antwerp case, and we're very proud about that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. So now there is some time for the questions and answers, and we already raised 3 questions. The first one was about the difference between really standing outside of the government and reacting, opposing the governing structures, or working in a more hybrid way and co-create, cooperate with them. And a related question is, what does it do to an organization? Are you a different type of organization? If you choose one of the strategies, either being more outside or remaining outside, or more the co-creation way, and how you work as an organization, and what is it? Is there a main difference? Perhaps Desmond, you can have your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's important to work. No one size fits the entire argument. I think there are many ways in how we deal with this issue, and the inside strategy is critical. It depends on the willingness of governments to wanting to work and talk together with the society. And there are instances where you might find people within government who are willing to listen and are willing to work together. But you might also find that government ignores. Government doesn't want to change. So we have that situation. It just depends on where you are. Co-creation, in most instances, and when we approach the word co-creation, it means being inclusive. It means working together. It means developing plans that ultimately belongs to all of us. But what we see is sometimes government comes with a ready-made plan that's already been developed from the top down. And when it comes to the ordinary people, they don't accept it because it hasn't been created jointly with everybody. Their ideas, their vision, and the expression is not included. So that's been a problem, and I've been talking to government on a regular basis. It's amazing that during the COVID, I've had more engagement in government since 2020 and 2021 than I've ever had in all my life working in South Africa and in Durban. And that's through the virtual. But also government, in some instances, as I said, will listen and we can do things together. But in most cases, we're finding out that the government's plan doesn't necessarily belong to the community plan. What has happened in South Africa is what we call corporate capture, where big corporations second some of the scientists, architects, planners into government to plan jointly. And so when government brings these big infrastructure programs out, it's already been done about 8 years, 10 years beforehand. And they then come presented as fait accompli. In other words, there's nothing we can do about it. There's no sharing of information despite this progressive constitution. You have to beg and ask for information to see how they came to the decisions that they make. And that is the problem in South Africa currently, where it's unlike, and I'm sure I've been to Denmark and other parts of Europe, where you can walk into the government office and get a plan and get a permit. If you ask for it, you get it. In South Africa, we don't get that. We ask for a permit, we have to go through a process of the Promotions to Administration Act, PIA. It takes over 18 months before you even get to the high courts or any court. And then you must have money for lawyers to challenge them to get the information. So that's the problem. As much as society wants to work with government in South Africa, there are pre-plans that come to us. An example now, in most of the harbors, in 3 of the harbors in South Africa, the government has gone and signed agreements to put a Turkish company that supplies energy, car power, which is much more expensive than anything else and will increase the cost of electricity or energy to either the big corporations or ordinary citizens. But guess what they do? They don't discuss, they don't consult, they go and place it in the harbor and they realize that later on we'll talk to you. And when they realize they've erred and made a mistake, then they stop and realize, whoa, we're going to end up in court and we're going to lose the case. So most of the time, our last resort is to resort to the courts, to turn to the courts because procedures are not followed. Information is not being provided. Any contracts that are signed behind closed doors. That's the difference. A sign behind closed doors, which has led to all the corruption that we see. So big infrastructure developments is linked to big corruption in South Africa. Billions of rands have been looted through the corruption, and we had the Zondo Commission in South Africa currently that's busy with billions of rands that have been looted by government officials, by politicians, all through big infrastructure, including the latest COVID-19, where we had 500 billion looted. No one can account for the money. So we want a different, if you want to make a difference in society, you need to come with different ideas. Yes, we need to work together, but then it has to come with openness, it has to come with transparency, it has to come with a commitment to listen to the other side. And that's what is lacking in the country at the moment.
Thank you. Manu, do you have a reaction to that?
Yes, well, one thing we learned tonight is that the situation in Durban and the situation in Antwerp is so wildly different that it's hard to compare, of course, Desmond. So, but still, we also come from an era, let's say between 2005 and 2017, where there was this conflict where the government didn't listen, where we also had to go after the documents, where it took a lot of time and effort to find out what was happening. So it was very much top down. And one of the things that you said is we have the project has to belong to us. The project has to belong, this inclusiveness you were talking about. I think that's a very important thing, that it has to belong to the people, in the sense that there's two ways that happen. When it belongs to the people, it means that, of course, it's more democratic than when it doesn't belong, but also the support for the project will be much bigger. So the energy that goes to this project, whether it's environmental justice or a better port, this expansion of the port conflict that you are having now, we had that in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s here in Antwerp. This port grew and grew and grew, and nobody was happy. And here in Belgium, it really took rural areas. So the best soil in the country was taken, the best agriculture soil was taken for this expansion. But this battle is over. So the battle now is a different battle. So the project has to belong to the people. And that's why we moved from this conflict to this co-creation, and also to, like you mentioned, to join the power, to join, I myself joined the board of trustees of this company that is going to build a lot of things. And we did that in order, as you mentioned, in order to avoid that it will be recaptured. So if we don't want it to be recaptured, we have to be on that side as well to avoid this recapturing. So we have to risk ourselves in the sense that we join the other groups, the other part, the power, in order to make sure that we just don't work in all these workbenches, and then it goes to the power level, and they do their thing. That's one of the reasons why we decided to make that move.
Okay, but in what sense did you had to accept? Well, that billions of euros still went to motorway projects. Was that a deliberate choice, or was that the government who imposed that as a constraint? It's with the motorway project, or you do not get the participation, the workbenches, and all the co-creation. Was that the situation?
No, it's because we need that motorway. So there's a lot of misunderstanding with a lot of people. We need the motorway because the ring road is not closed, and there's a river involved also. This motorway goes underneath the river, and there's only one tunnel, which basically takes all the traffic from one part of the country leading to the other part. So the problem is the Antwerp ring road. There's 300,000 cars a day passing on the Antwerp ring road. That's gigantic. And this ring road combines the international traffic with the local traffic. So that's why we needed a second river crossing, a second motorway, to make sure that we could split those things. But what we wanted to avoid is that there would be more cars in the end. So the current ring road will be reduced, and the new ring road will take this added capacity. So the ring road was necessary for the whole thing. This new ring road will cost about 4 billion euros. Capping the ring road will be 9 billion euros. And then there's also the modal shift projects, and then there's also the new parks that will be built. The total will be like 15 billion euros. The motorway is 4 billion, sorry.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Desmond, back to you.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's a different scenario. That's quite true. And there are reasons. A lot of the big corporations, they come from the Netherlands, Germany, US, UK, Australia, Canada. But when they come to Africa and when they come to Durban, they have double standards. They do not follow the same law that's enacted in the EU or in Brussels or in Antwerp, and bring those same progressive laws to the country. What they do is they come here and they get the okay behind the society from the government. And what happens is that then they get the commitment to go ahead and do whatever they want to, whether it's the mining issue, And in South Africa, we have a huge problem. A lot of people have been killed off because of the big corporations. Because when the society suddenly stands up and says, we don't want mining on our land, those corporations go and buy people off. And we've seen a lot of the activists have been killed in South Africa, north and south. The big chemical companies in Durban, where I come from, my home was petrol bombed at 12 o'clock at midnight, sent by the oil corporations because I stood up against them because of the double standards. They have one standard for Europe, and they have another standard for Africa, and they have another standard for South Africa and Durban in particular. Where we done the comparison studies in Denmark, we found out that Shell in Denmark, Fredericia and Shell in Rotterdam had different standards. But when they came to South Africa and in Durban, that huge amount of explosions and fires, they didn't bother to the air pollution. So it's that sort of thing. And where they have captured our government in the sense that they do not want to bring the international standards that they got to conform to in Antwerp. They don't want it in South Africa because they've applied for what I call exemptions, for those standards to be deferred for a number of years. A company that's been operating in South Africa for over 50 years comes and still wants another 20 years, another 30 years to conform to international standards. That is the problem that we are facing.
I think you're making a very important point, Desmond, and I think that's something that I want to sort of dwell a little bit on, because that's really the kind of colonial relationships that structure the comparison, I think, between Antwerp and Durban, because effectively Antwerp has the second biggest petrochemical cluster in the world. So we also have a lot of petrochemical industries, but as you rightly point out, they are held to certain standards that they have to live up to, which they don't do in the place where you're working from. So I wanted to ask you, what is your expectation of the sort of urban social movements in places like Antwerp, who are also kind of working, in the same kind of situations? What are your expectations about the solidarity of that kind of movement? So, for example, Manu's movement with what you are doing in South Africa. Can they do more? What do they do? Can they do more? What do you expect from them?
Well, certainly, I think change will only come through people. No matter what figures you can put across, people will make the changes. And hence our cooperation with people, with Milieu Defensie, Friends of the Earth, with groups in Europe to bring about change, because some people are still living and dwelling on that the fossil fuel industry can continue to grow when it's coming to an end. Now, I can say that we need to work together with groups in Antwerp. I think civil society has to come together. But like we have done, and I've called this out on regular basis, that the UN processes since 1992, because of a number of civil society groups, the big groups, that have sat in these processes and compromised the future of the young people. We can't continue down that road of compromising and accepting that big infrastructure is the way to go. People believe that change will only come if people own the processes. Now we see a lot of young people protesting all over the show, including where I come from in Durban, because they realize that their future is going to be compromised and their children's future is going to be compromised. And so what we seek is collaboration with civil society all over the world, so we can come to the changes, the solutions that can bring about one world that we all yearn for. We should all be equal. We should all be the same. We should all be human. But that can only come if we all come together in working for a commonality that brings about those changes that are needed. The changes we've been waiting for since 1992 of Rio has not come about. We've seen that with the Extinction Rebellion, we've seen with the fossil fuel, that changes are coming much more rapidly because people have realized we can't wait. And we can't stop the changes we are seeking and it won't stop. The train has already left the station. And I certainly believe that whether we like it or not, the changes are going to come. And whether government adheres to it, and I see the change, I see governments in other parts of the world are listening. But that same listening, or that same directive, or the same governments are talking something else behind closed doors to our government leaders. And we've seen it at Copenhagen. We've seen it at Mexico. We've seen it in Durban when we had the COPs, the Conference of the Parties, where our governments had to listen to the Europeans. We had to listen, despite the fact that the pollution, the burden of the pollution, is not being made by the people of Africa and South Africa and Durban. This has been brought onto us. And yet we pay the price. And yet we must still compromise. And yet no changes come about. There's a debt that's owed to the South, the global South, and that should be forthcoming. We should not be transferring all the dirty industries to the global South and killing us off in the global South. That is the problem. More and more of the industry, the more you put more strong laws in Antwerp and all over Europe, those same dirty industries end up in Durban. And what happens? We suffer from those pollution with high levels of asthma, cancer, and leukemia, respiratory illnesses, and we die because of that. That's why they call it Cancer Alley, because we transfer all the dirty industries to the South and in Durban. And that's not the right thing to do. Let us be open about that. Let us speak about that. Let us see that what is the solution. If you're saying it's not in your backyard, why is it in my backyard? It should be in nobody's backyard.
Yeah, we even in a situation that when a company here tries to establish a factory in the Antwerp port, if we have strict laws, of course, but they try to lower standards once in a while, and they also threaten to leave Antwerp or to leave Europe for other places because they, of course, openly say the standards are different there. So that's kind of a dilemma also for people here. It comes back to us, the lowering of the standards. There's a constant pressure also to lower standards here to keep the companies here. That's one thing I want to say. Another thing is, I think we can do from Europe towards Durban and other places, we can probably do two things. It's difficult to influence or to put pressure on local politics because the political systems are different, the living standards are different, the susceptibility to corruption is different, let's say, so that's hard to compare, but probably we can put pressure on companies. And also, as we have a huge port here, perhaps from this port of Antwerp, things can be said about the port in Durban as well on a high level. And another thing I want to say is that it's still important for us, although it's not, we cannot be compared in where we are at the level of co-creation. It's still important for us to try to find this highest level of co-creation in here in Antwerp to show what is possible on that level. So it's like a dream of co-creation that we are trying to establish so that other people also can say, we want what they are having in this laboratory. It's a dream. So I think we can work on different levels, probably.
Thank you, Manu and Desmond. Maybe just one final question to wrap up the session. It's a question in the chat from Jennifer Robinson, who's of course very familiar, of course, with the situation in Africa, and she has a question to both of you. It's a kind of mirroring question, and I think to Manu, she would like to ask, what would cause you to withdraw from the collaboration? So when would you say, this is not a situation in which I can keep on co-creating for the moment? And of course, the same question to Desmond, what would draw you to join a co-creation, Desmond? What would need to happen for you? What kind of condition would need to be in place for you to say, this is the moment where we can start co-creating? So perhaps start with Desmond and then have the word for Manu.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, we would want to make sure firstly that government allows the participation of civil society in an open and transparent manner. That seems to lack in South Africa, the bottom-up approach to get ordinary people and capture their views. I think if they do that and they listen to people and develop a co-creation plan that encompasses everyone, I think, and it uplifts and improves the lives of many of our people that live in abject poverty and inhumane conditions, then I'm willing to work with them. I've said that many times. I'm willing to hold hands with government on condition that they play open cards, they are transparent, but also the views of the poor and masses of our people, that is considered. And from what we've seen of 25 years of democracy in South Africa, the South African government has failed that test. So co-creation, whilst it sounds like a good word, it must be involving people to improve their lives. If it doesn't lead to a better life, what's the use of sitting there around the table, at the master's table, and getting the crumbs? Because then you're not going to improve people's lives. And willingly, as much as I'm willing to sit, I've told government in the last 2 weeks on co-creation, and I'd like to invite you guys to come to South Africa one day and do a presentation on co-creation, and let's advise the governments here, or our people, that co-creation means the full participation of ordinary people. It can't be something created elsewhere, and then you call it co-creation, and then you hand it to us on the table and say, well, this is the document that we presented now, we want you to accept it. Or we can tweet it here and tweet it there and just make minor changes. That's not co-creation. Co-creation is an alternative vision that improves people's lives and makes a better world for all of us.
Yeah, it's a great question about when are you going to step out, because we're dealing with that question ourselves all the time, every day. We stepped, in 2017, we stepped inside, let's say, inside parts of the power chambers, because we had the idea that we owned the project. Like Desmond said, it's a very interesting concept. I'll take that with me for tonight. It's owning this project. So you won't leave the process when you don't get everything you want, because the idea of co-creation and participation is you do that with a lot of people, so that means you have to give in. You don't get your own dream. That's part of the problem and part of the solution, of course. Because other people want their share of the dream as well, and all these pieces together are the dream. So we don't leave the table when it's not to our liking. But we will leave the table when we have the idea that we don't own the project. That at some other places, secretly or openly, things are happening that are not part of the deal. And we put a lot of energy in that. We don't put a lot of energy in making sure that the project is to our liking, because it's happening, but we put a lot of energy in keeping the process on the tracks, keeping the speed, because 2030 is the aim, keeping the politicians to their promises of investment. Of course, city councils come and go. Flemish governments, they come and go. It's a long-term process. New politicians come on the scene, and they have to be trained, let's say, in this new culture. So we put a lot of energy in owning the project. The day that we don't own the project anymore, then we leave the table.
Okay, thanks a lot, Manu and Desmond in Durban. We've been this conference day has already been going on for more than 9 hours. So we're I think ready to wrap up. Thanks a lot, Manu, for joining us in the studio here in Antwerp. Thanks a lot, Desmond, for taking the time in these difficult times for you in South Africa. We'll really in solidarity with what's happening there. Thanks a lot for making time for us and sharing your thoughts. I think this was a very interesting conversation across very different cases. So thanks a lot, and also for the people watching still in the conference room. Thanks a lot for being with us for such a long day, and we'll see you back tomorrow at the conference. Thanks a lot, and have a good night or afternoon wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.